In 1939, World War II officially began with Germany's invasion of Poland. The subsequent conflict in Europe is often referred to as the European Theatre, and it consisted of two fronts. The Western Front encompassed the fighting between Germany and Italy and the European nations west of them, including France, Great Britain, Denmark, Belgium, and eventually grew to include the United States as well. The Eastern Front, on the other hand, mainly dealt with the conflict between Germany and the USSR after Germany launched Operation Barbarossa, thus violating the non-aggression pact between the two nations. In the European theater, the United States Army was significantly more effective than the Soviet Army. This is evident from the staggering amount of losses that plagued the Soviet Army in comparison to the far fewer amount of casualties that the US sustained. While the Soviets did see some success in battle and did a lot of damage to the German corps, they were overall much less effective than the American army. Now let's take a look at some of the ways in which they were less effective.
Firstly, Russian forces lost many more people, around 11 million just counting soldiers and close to 25 million including civilians. Americans only lost around 400,000.
During World War II, America lost 400,000 over three main fronts. Now that may seem like a lot, but calm down. The Soviet Union lost 27 million in only one main front. Whoa! And can you believe that most of them died to sickness? And there are more who died of sickness than total Americans who died. Come on, man. You're doing something wrong.
Secondly, the Russians had significantly worse weapons compared to those of the United States. Also, they even received aid from US that provided them with weaponry and funding that they were lacking.
So, one of the main problems is Russia. They didn't have a big variety of weapons. They were stuck mostly with rifles such as the Mosin Nagant, which was made almost 100 years earlier. So, and when you try to get specialized weapons such as snipers and say longer range weapons, what a lot of soldiers had to do was simply take the Mosins and just modify them, which kind of limited it because they were stuck with one gun. Well, they didn't have not assault rifles. They had machine guns. They weren't the best. They were cheaply made, mass produced, because that's how the Russian army worked.
While the Russian army did see some victories in battle, this was diminished because of the fact that a lot of the deaths on the German side could be attributed to winter as opposed to the Russians actually fighting well. The Germans were ill-prepared and many of them froze to death because they didn't have the proper clothing or supplies. On top of this, the Russians, before they started having victories, they were pushed back significantly by the German forces, and they were pushed nearly to Moscow before they started gaining ground back. The role of winter in the Russians' victory and the fact that they were pushed back significantly, coupled with the previously mentioned issues of the high both civilian and military casualties, and the inferior weaponry of the Soviet Union, made it so that the American army was more effective than the Russian army, despite some of the victories that the Russian army saw.
Ultimately, the Soviet army did make some progress and deal a lot of damage to the German army. However, that being said, they were plagued with constant casualties coming from their soldiers having a lack of good weaponry or advanced training, and the damage that they did inflict to the Germans came primarily from the harsh environment they were fighting in, and the fact that the German army was not prepared. With all of these issues, topped off by the idea that the US even aided the Soviets with weaponry, proves to show just how much more effective the American army was than the Soviet.
Some will never return. Embrace these, Father, and receive them, thy heroic servants, into thy kingdom.